Okay, so welcome to Business Communications for Entrepreneurs and Startups. This is for only amazing entrepreneurs and startups, so just to make sure that's you guys, right? Is that correct? Awesome. Okay, this is a good start already. So this particular module, we're going to be able to do a lot of things. So big keys are being able to identify your key stakeholders. So very quickly, when you're building any kind of business, it's extremely important to identify the stakeholders in general, but in addition, when it comes to communications, you want to plan this out beforehand so you know who you're going to have to communicate with, how you're going to communicate with them, and what types of communications those are going to undertake. So for example, very quickly, for customers, how are you going to communicate with your customers, right? For things like potential customers, how are you going to communicate with them? That can include things like nurturing. How do you nurture a customer? What kind of things do you have to send them? So we will touch on that. We're going to work on our written and oral communications. That sounds pretty boring, but I'm going to try to put some fun twists on it so we can have some fun with it. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this before, but we're going to practice some what's called active listening. It's something that I've found very important in my career over the last 20 years, so that's something that we're going to go over. We're going to go over things like sales cycle and how the communication cycle applies to sales cycle. We're going to talk about the proper etiquette for meetings, both internal and external. Again, I know that sounds like it can be pretty bland, but I'm going to try to make that kind of fun with some interesting twists along the way. We're going to apply what you're learning to the sales cycle and to the marketing cycle and how those things fit together, especially communications-wise. We're going to have an effective customer onboard or communication cycle during your onboarding and customer success cycles. So very quickly, this may not apply to every business, but in many businesses, if you have any type of customer, there may be what's called an onboarding period. That's especially true of software as a service companies or SaaS companies. Or even in Weimar's, I guess I have a little bit of extra info, but even in your case with the bicycle social community store, when you're bringing in new clientele and new members, you might have some sort of onboarding procedure, right? This is also true, onboarding is also inclusive of new employees. So as you're growing your team, you may have an onboarding process for your team. What happens when somebody comes onto your team? How do you communicate with them? What kind of materials are you going to have to provide them and communicate to them, right? Knowing the difference between, and I see this a lot with people I work with, so what we're going to do by the end of this is we're going to understand the difference between a proposal, a statement of work, an agreement, and a memorandum of understanding. Now, a lot of people think those are interchangeable, but there are certain places and times for each of those things, and depending on the type of business you are, sometimes one fits better than the other. So we're gonna go over that. And then at the end, the cool thing with that work package, I know a lot of you have been practicing your pitches at our events, but what's really cool is that we're going to be able to use this work package and I'm going to teach you how to have an effective and structured pitch and presentation and why that's important. In fact, we're going to start that today. So very quickly, weeks 1 and 2, this is the stuff that we're going to go over. I'm not going to bother to drive along through that. So this is us, this is me. So I didn't bother putting a picture on this. I like trying to keep it simple and clean. So here's a picture of me. Aha! And there's a picture of you. So, you know, to give you a really quick background on myself from what you haven't garnered from the pitch events thus far when we've met outside of this. So I'm an almost 20-year entrepreneur myself, technically longer if I go into my longer story. My first unofficial business when I was about 13. I didn't know what an entrepreneur was at the time, but it was clearly in my blood, and that's a story for another time that I can tell you guys. But my first sort of official business was when I was 19. Pre-incorporation, I started as sort of a hobby side business, mostly because I was in the music industry and it was something connected to that. And then eventually it grew into solutions for small businesses such as graphic design, flat websites, communications for small businesses. newsletters, things like that, customer service solutions. So I incorporated that at 21, and eventually over the years that grew into a full service digital agency. So for those of you who don't know what that means, a full service digital agency is all those things I just mentioned, like graphic design, web development, all of those things, but a much larger and heavier scale. So to give you an idea, from 2013 to 2014, we grew from 6 to 23 people. And we quadrupled our revenue and had amazing clients. Who here is aware of Daily Hive, or what used to be called Vancity Bus? Are any of you aware of that website?
That's
The web blog for Vancouver Vancity Bus.
What's going on?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So Daily Hive, very popular website. So they were one of our first large clients. We had other ones like a really famous chocolatier in West Vancouver. We had a huge research company that was, had a global brand. So we had some pretty amazing clients and grew very quickly, and it was an incredible ride. And my two partners in that company bought me out in 2015. And then I started Elevator, which now last year became Volition. And then a sidetrack from that, just to give you an idea. So obviously in the agency side, I had a lot of touch points with communications, a lot of touch points with different departments that touched communications, as well as investor fundraising and fundraising from partners and talking to partners and clients and all this stuff. So a lot of the stuff that I'm teaching today, I had a hand in at almost every level within that company. Now, where I first got my first start in tech, or first taste of tech, was back when I was about 24 and a half. There was this website coming up that you may have heard called the Facebook. So back then, Facebook was just kind of starting up. I got hired on and sidetracked from my small side business to run this company. And what the company started out as was online gaming on the Facebook. So it started out actually with poker on Facebook. So what we did is we had built if you imagine this as your poker table, we built a proprietary back end, proprietary meaning only ours, and different than everybody else's. But we built a back end that allowed the social networks to connect together. So at the time, the popular social networks were Facebook, Hi-Fi, Friendster, Bebo, and Orkut. MySpace was very quickly on the way out. They just didn't want to admit it, even though they're still hanging around today. But what we had done is integrated and connected the social networks together along with our web app website, so that people from different social networks could play at the same poker table at the same time. And it was quite revolutionary at the time, being that they could communicate with each other, they could bet against each other, the whole bit. The quick story of it is that eventually the online gambling world collapsed. They announced that online poker was technically illegal. The largest site in the world at the time was called Bodog in that space. And the owner of that got arrested. So our owner was like, you need to completely change the business. You've got 2 weeks or I'm shutting it down. So we came up with a novel way of taking the technology we built and integrated it into a set of word and puzzle games. And we were able to grow that. And eventually after meeting a lot of investors, and that was part of my job, is cleaning bathrooms and pitching to investors and everything else in between. Our owner came in one day and said, I sold the company and congratulations, but pack up your stuff and get out. And it was quite an interesting experience, and it gave my first taste of tech and growing and building a company truly, and the first taste of an exit, which it was a totally modest exit. It wasn't like newsworthy or anything, but it was nice to be able to put some money in the bank so that I could grow my next business and continue going from there. But of course, I learned a lot at the time, and I also had to learn a lot about social networking. To give you an idea, I didn't have a Facebook profile when I started with that company, so I was completely, I remember when the owner was like, oh, so you know how to work Facebook and market and advertise on there, right? I was like, oh yeah. Literally, I had no idea. And I had no idea how to work Twitter. I didn't know how to do MailChimp. I didn't know how to do any of the main tools that were out there, so I had to just figure it out. There was no guidebook, there was no guidelines. I was on with Facebook customer service almost every day trying to figure out stuff. I'd have like 98 campaigns going at any given time, and have most of them paused. So it was a great opportunity to see myself through. So in addition to that, I'm also a father of 3 boys and married to my wife, who we're 10 years next month. And it keeps me pretty busy. And in addition to all this, as you know me from Volition, I also have a tech startup in the retail sector called BrickClick. What we do is, if you imagine a pipe, we integrate all of the different software and data and inventory and information for a retailer into one pipe, and then we allow a retailer to centralize their management and visualize all of the data in one central place. So we currently have a bunch of customers we're onboarding. We're just starting to get into revenue and growing the company. So yeah, that's a bit about me. So what I wanted to do really quickly was I know I've kind of briefly met you guys outside of this, but I wanted to maybe just have a really quick brief on each of you guys. If you can, maybe we'll start over here.
9 seconds speech.
Nice. You have 14 seconds. Yeah.
My name is Andres Puentes. I have an engineering background. I'm an electrical and electronics engineer. I work almost over 7 years in the oil and gas industry, and I decided to change what I was doing, and decided to come here to get the skills to open my own business.
Cool.
I'm very interested in clean tech, in clean energies and
clean tech particularly?
I already tried once to get out of oil and gas and start working in energy efficiency. That lasted a year and a half, and then I went back to oil and gas. And then I moved to Vancouver.
Cool. From
Colombia. Colombia.
Okay, cool.
So hi, my name is Sara. I'm also from Colombia. I'm a business engineer back home. I also have a postgraduate degree in marketing, but I have never worked in marketing. I was a business manager for a car dealership.
Okay.
Yeah, for 6 years. So my background is especially in the administrative areas and commercial areas. So I wanted to come here as well, like Andres, because I wanted to get some skills or to find a way to start a business, because that's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and that's why.
Cool.
I'm Valan. I have lots of experience in different areas. I have background in communication and journalism and lots of things. But I really love sports and outdoor activities, and I do that for all my life. I'm about 14 years old, and I'm looking for opportunity to bring that dream come true. And I think here is the best place in the world. Right now, but in 10 years, I think it will be better and better and better.
Yeah.
That's the cycle we are going up. I think that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So as I mentioned, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and just seeing how the landscape here has changed. So to give you an idea on that, the tech company that I mentioned, it was called Competitive Games. Back then, so what's that now? We're almost 12 years ago, I think it was. Keep in mind that when I was working for that company, the attitude for most of Vancouver at the time was, don't tell anyone what you're working on. Everyone's going to steal your idea. You're hooped if you say anything, anyone. And in fact, my boss was like, you're fired if I find out that you told anybody that I told you can't talk, that you can talk to me. So it was back then it was totally different. Now it's such an amazing spirit here and community. People really want to help. You have amazing programming like this and many other organizations that are here to really help on the journey. And a lot of it I kind of wish existed when I was around and when I was starting out, but a lot of my ways of learning was just doing and falling on my face, which for worse or for not, it worked for me, and hurt along the way, but it helped me learn faster, I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's very easy to feel that.
Yes.
So that I'm from Brazil and it's totally different.
Yeah.
The mindset is exactly like that. Don't talk.
Yeah.
No. Don't talk about money. Don't talk about. Simple like that. And,
It's, I would always say to anyone nowadays, if somebody asks me what the Vancouver landscape is like, and for the most part now, I would say I agree. I really think we're starting to just scratch the surface.
Yep.
And there's a lot of stuff that we're going to start seeing, especially with some American money coming in now. There's a lot of organizations coming in from Toronto that are starting bigger and better accelerators, like Omer's Ventures is coming in. It's going to be an interesting time over the next 5 or 10 years for sure. Marian, do I know you from somewhere?
I don't know. So I'm Marian, I'm from Slovakia, and my background basically in kind of web design and design, Photoshop and stuff like this. And I'm here because I like to create or have my own company, like about digital graphics and stuff. So and I don't know what else. I'm volunteer for workshop.
This is our last. This is our last.
This is my last job.
Oh, this is your last
Yeah.
course? Oh, okay.
Because he's on the marketing.
Got you. Okay, cool. And then last but not least.
Yeah, my name is Douglas. I'm from Brazil as well. My background, I'm an administrator. My background, I work with supply chain, logistics, and for like 10 years in my country. I'm being here to get a new business for me, to invest in that idea, and I have some ideas to improve. But yeah, I think that's my goal. That's why I'm here.
Cool. Awesome. Neat. Oh, I guess we've gone on screensaver here. Haha. Cool, thank you for that. So I am just confirming the last couple of speakers, but I'll bounce back to that at the very end because one of them I need your guys' hopeful flexibility on. I have an amazing, actually, why don't we just get to it now? Whatever, why would I allude to it? I'll just tell you now. So I have this incredible guest speaker who is willing to come in. He's a good friend of mine. His name is Philip. He's from a local company called Rent Moolah. Rent Moolah is an incredibly awesome company. The very basic is that they allow people to pay their rent by credit card, and then you get rewarded to do so, especially if you pay early and all that kind of stuff. So they solved the problem. Well, I'll let him tell you more, hopefully. So basically, if I can remember the date, I think it's on July 18th. My hope was that you guys might be open and willing to do the class 1 hour earlier because he can only do the speaking opportunity at 3 o'clock. So I wanted to get your guys as okay to do it at that time on that day. Yep, everybody's good?
Which day?
Okay.
Which day?
July 18th. I think it's a Tuesday?
It's Wednesday.
Wednesday, sorry, yes.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That cool for everybody? Okay, awesome. So I'll confirm with Philip, so he's done. And I'm just waiting for the last confirmation from the last speaker. She said she was gonna let me know tonight. She just had a baby a little while ago, so she's sort of just like, I just have to arrange. I'm in, I just have to make sure I have the
I think
childcare.
we have
so.
a crib here if she wants.
Nice. Do you have a cage?
Yeah.
Wait, hold on. That's me as a father of 3 boys saying that. So I have an incredible set of speakers going to be coming in and doing some guest speaking. There's 5 in total over the course. Some of them include, there's Katerina Papadakos of Espresso Capital. So she's going to come in at the very end and tell us a bit about herself. She's going to tell us about communications with an investor and what that looks like and what their expectations are. So she has experience on both the venture capital and the debt equity and the angel investing side. So she has a good scope and view on all of those things. So she can kind of tell us what that is. And then what's cool is at the very end, the reason I'm really excited about that one in particular, because Katerina's awesome for one, but also from the work package that we're going to work on through the course, we're going to actually practice our pitch with her at the very end and get her feedback from the perspective of an actual VC debt equity investor. So that's going to be pretty cool. In addition to that, I don't think I have it on here.
You want the names?
Yeah, and then in addition to that, so I suggested, or I commented that we were going to talk about customer success and onboarding. So a friend of mine named Jean is going to come in. He has worked with many Vancouver startups, but also San Francisco startups. So he has a very interesting view on both sides of the border. And what he specializes in is consulting and advising companies on their customer success onboarding, nurturing, and communications thereof. So he's going to have a very interesting view on that. And John is just overall a super nice guy and really, really smart. So tons to learn from him. And then the last person is another friend of mine named Colin McWhinney. So he is also a reputable advisor and consultant in the Vancouver startup community, and particularly around sales. So there's a real lack of good salespeople nowadays. So he helps a lot of companies figure that out when they're first building up. Instead of having to go and hire a $75,000 a year minimum VP of sales, which a lot of startups make the mistake of doing, he helps them with a better strategy and growth plan to work around that in the meantime, and actually can be a fill-in in some cases. So really, really good there. All right. Oh, whoops, because I'm on the wrong one. There we go. Okay. Well, why is it? Oh, there we go. Just had to load. All right. So what we're going to do, I want to touch on the work package to start. So we're going to get into kind of the meat really quickly about pitch, presentation, and storytelling. So I know that a lot of you, or actually all of you, have been to our pitch night, so you've probably heard some of what I'm going to say at the events, but I still want to tell them to you one-on-one. Now you have me here with you, and we can actually go through it together person to person. So the big thing that I tell anyone is that, you've probably heard this before, but we have to remember that when you're a startup or an entrepreneur, the thing that you want is people to believe in you. The reality is for early stage investment, and remembering that investment isn't always just money. Investment could be me giving you my time. It could be giving you advice. It could be giving you money. It could be giving you connections. It could be anything, right? An investment is an investment that of anything of any kind of value. So, and it may not be in exchange for anything. You don't necessarily have to sell equity for it. Maybe sometimes you pay for it, but they'll give you a discount. There's all sorts of framing around that. But most people that I know won't just take on any client or won't take on anybody who's an entrepreneur. A lot of times it is part of a sales process or a pitching process. They want to believe in you. Why should I help you, right? And to a greater level, especially if you're pitching to investors, what you really want to show off is why that person should believe in you particularly. So you are the star of the show. Why are you the one that's going to win? You know, in English language, we have this great saying of like who's the horse that's going to drive the cart? You know, how are you going to get across the finish line? In other words, how are you going to win? So why you? Why are you the one that's going to win at this thing that you're doing? We have to remember, building a business is hard. And I'm not here to scare you, but the reality is that it is hard. And a good friend of mine, Keith, who you guys may or may not know, he says it really well, which is it takes a village. So that village can include people that you're pitching to, presenting to, and advisors and investors and connections and partners and even new teammates. A lot of times when you're trying to grow your team and add to your team, it's also sort of a pitch and presentation. You need them to believe in you. Why are you the one that they should join on with? Because trust me, I've been there many times, even with Bricklick. There's been moments where I have to go to the team, and luckily I've won them over. They believe in me. But there's times where I have to go to them and say, guys, I'm sorry, but I'm short right now. Like, the investment hasn't come in from the investor yet, so I can only give you half your paychecks, but like, give me a couple weeks and I'll get the rest in, right? But it's all about building that belief and legitimacy and trust, right? So I say this a lot. There's obviously the screen says it, and that there's 5 tips that I would give it to anyone. And number 1 is that you are the star of the show. So whenever you're pitching and presenting, it's really about how you present, and if there's a slide deck or not, your slide deck, if there is one, needs to be your supporting actor. So it's not there. I see this all too often, unfortunately. Just people just plop tons of text and all sorts of images up on the screen, and then they talk over it. But the challenge is, psychologically, what do you think happens if I'm reading the screen? Does anybody?
The audience lost attention. They start reading the screen.
Correct. If I'm reading, humans unfortunately aren't great at doing multiple things at once. So, especially when it comes to listening and viewing. So, the challenge is if I'm reading, I'm not listening. Now, when I just said what I just said of you're the star of the show, what are they missing out on? They're missing out on the star of the show, right? So let's not take away from that, because you're the amazing reason at this stage of the game that I'm going to invest. A lot of times as an investor, I'm not going to just look at your business plan and go, oh yeah, that sounds great, here's a $100,000 check. That's not how it works. Not at early stage investing. 98% of the time, not at any stage of investing. I know we hear all these stories out of San Francisco and out of Seattle and out of Boston and in Europe and all over the place about people getting these huge checks. But don't fool yourselves. It wasn't like they walked into a room and it was like, oh my God, checks are just thrown at me. That is maybe one time out of 300,000 pitches. Right? It's very, very rare. The reality is I pitched to you, we had another meeting, and another meeting, and then one more meeting, and then I had to send you some documentation somewhere along the way, and then there was a review, and then eventually I go, you know what, I'm in. Let's do it, right? There's a process to it, but a lot of it is going to be about me trusting you, because let's be real, startup life is not, as I said, easy, and it's also not a straight line. Many of you might have seen the image on LinkedIn or on any website, Facebook or whatever, but the entrepreneurial journey isn't like this. It's like this. Right? So me as an investor, what I want to know and what I'm trying to garner is, are you the one that's going to see it through so that it looks like this? I don't really care what's happening on the day-to-day. And ultimately, I know that it's like this, but I want to trust that you're the one that's going to be able to see that through. And that you're going to be able to get through that and get through the hard times and the ups and the downs. And often I say, being an entrepreneur is much like a roller coaster ride. Now, I hate roller coasters, but it's a good analogy nonetheless. So being an entrepreneur is much like a roller coaster ride. So what I say usually to that is that when you're up, you're up. When you're down, you're down. And if you're coasting somewhere in between, you're not doing your job. So what that means is you gotta keep going. You can't just coast. You gotta get out there. You gotta keep asking. You gotta keep looking for the customers, the users, the partners, the contacts. Get the information out there so that people are out there to help you, connect with you, and make it happen. Because like I said, it takes a village. One thing that I hear a lot when I see pitches, so this is something that actually hasn't come up a lot at our pitch events, and that's predominantly more because at our pitch events, the companies are very early stage. So the reality is, a lot of times they don't have a lot of data yet to back anything up, right? They're just starting out, or they're only like 3 months in or 6 months in. They don't have a lot of sales yet. They don't have a lot of numbers to back anything up. But what I would say to anyone is, if you do have any numbers are fantastic. If you can include any kind of statistics or numerical quantifications or things to back up what you're saying, if you have any kind of numbers, quantify it. So don't just come up with a number and go, yeah, our target market is this big. I hear that a lot. Our target market is $50 million in the next 2 years. And it's like, but how did you arrive at that? And what does that actually mean to you? What does that mean for the business? A great example is, I'm raising money. I'm raising $250,000. Okay, for what? What is that going to do for you? How are you going to use that money? What's the use of proceeds, as I would call it, right? A great investor friend of mine, his name's Anthony, the greatest thing that he always says is, I'll invest in anyone as long as I can see how they're going to make my money work. I don't want them working for the money. I want them making my money work. As in, what are they going to achieve from it? Most investors know that if I'm going to put in money today, it doesn't mean I'm going to get an exit tomorrow. Because investors are investing why? Why are investors
The
investing?
star of the show.
Because the what?
The star of the show, the guy that you.
Yes, but
selling.
what's the end goal?
They want to make money.
They want a return.
Oh,
They're investing
they want more
because
money.
they want an end return. It's the point of investing, right? If they didn't believe that that was going to be the case, then I would just put my money in property or in assets or in stock, right? But they're investing in early stage entrepreneurship or early stage startups because they believe that there's going to be a positive outcome. And so what you have to remember is that those numbers, how you're going to make money work, is extremely important when you're pitching to an investor. Okay? It's also important when you're pitching to team members. Because think about it. If I'm coming onto your team and you're a startup, how am I going to trust what you're going to do with that money? Cool, okay, so you're going to raise all this money, but how are you going to spend that? How are you going to grow the company? How do I know we're not going to be closed down in 3 months? You can't be sure about anything. But it's about trust, right? Quantify it, have a good story. Again, this is all storytelling. A lot of it is just made up, but let's make it sound legit and real. Make it seem like you've done your homework. All too often I see people come up and go, blah, 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 and it seems like they haven't done their homework. Or they haven't looked it up. I'm going to raise $1 million and my company's worth $20 million tomorrow. And it's like, what? Where did you get all this from? How does that even happen? Oh, screensavers, dang it. So as I talked about, number 3, investors are investing in you. Legitimacy and how you're going to win are key. So I talked about that already. So obviously you want to show off that. In anything that's around a 3 to 5 minute pitch, you normally don't want anything more than 10 slides. You generally also don't want less than 5. So my common number seems to be around 8 or 9, and then you have supplementary slides afterwards. But no more than 10 would be my recommendation. And here's why. This is a little tidbit between me and you. So the thing that I've discovered over the last, call it almost 13 years of fundraising, and doing it a lot and working with a lot of investors now, the thing that I see very, very often is generally you actually only have, let me split this into 2 things. So a pitch competition is one thing, right? Getting up on stage. I think some of you came to Fundica, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Getting up on stage and doing a 5-minute presentation, that's a 5-minute presentation. There's no variance to that, right? So you can finish kind of within that or whatever. But what I'm actually talking about is when I'm actually sitting down with you as an investor. So I'm an investor, you're sitting down with me. The generality of that is you have 3 minutes. Most investors will make their determination within 3 minutes of the conversation. And they'll either determine whether they're interested or they're not. And how they determine that is in your pitch. So you want to make sure you get out most of the factors within those 3 minutes. The things that are really going to show off to them and be like, oh, this is legit. This is one that I want to follow. And what you want to express is the things like how you're going to win, how you're going to get a return. And that's what's great about this, what I call the Soyuz technique that I've created, is that you should be able to do it within that time. You can get across the things, as I will say, a lot of investors call it filling their buckets or ticking the boxes, right? So if you imagine, if I'm looking to invest and I want to get a return, then what's something that's very strong with early stage startups? It's risk. There is a huge and immense amount of risk. So when I'm looking at you and I'm hearing your pitch, what I want to be doing is taking off boxes, and every box I take off is de-risking the opportunity. Then that's where I'm going to go, yeah, you know what, you've ticked my boxes. You'll hear that if you ever start meeting with investors on a regular basis, you'll actually start hearing that on a very regular basis. A lot of them will start saying, yeah, you know what, you've ticked my boxes, and let's keep the conversation going. And what will happen after the 3 minutes is they'll actually stop you. And if they're interested, they'll start asking their own questions. If they're not, do you know what'll happen? Way more about it. Yeah. Cool, yeah. Usually what they'll say is, oh, cool, send me your slide deck and I'll have a look at it.
Never do that.
No, that's it. Because what they're really doing is they're going, yeah, send me your stuff, and if I have some time, I'll have a look at it. But the funny thing is most investors, what I actually really liked about Fundika particularly was Patrick was the main sponsor VC judge in the center. And he actually gave feedback.
The Asian guy?
Yeah, Patrick Laurie. So I don't know if you guys know where he comes from, but he was the co-founder of iStock Photo. So iStock Photo is one of the largest companies, photo repositories in the world. He had a huge exit out of it. And now he's a venture capital investor. And what was awesome, he's one of the first judges I've ever seen at a competition like that actually give feedback to the presenters of like, I wouldn't invest in you because of this, or this was totally off. Like, no, there's no way. Like, it was pretty amazing to see, and I really enjoyed it. The funny thing is that the opposite of that is what usually happens. You'll present to an investor, and most of the times they don't want confrontation. They feel bad when they give feedback, especially if it's negative feedback, especially if it's a no. So a lot of times they'll just skirt around the answer and just kind of ignore you until you go away. But that's where sometimes persistence is key. So I'll come back to that at the investor portion of our course. And then you guys have probably heard me say this many, many times, but always end with an ask. Make sure that ask is in there, because otherwise, what the heck are you pitching for? What was the point? And so it's funny because I get a lot of entrepreneurs that I work with, or a lot that have come through our events much before you guys started coming out, right? Remembering that we've been running them since January of 2016. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come through, and that's the feedback we give them when they don't have an ask. And then they're like, oh, but Paul, I'm an early stage startup, or I'm just an entrepreneur, and I just started, I don't have an ask yet. And to that, I'll watch my language on this. Usually I say bold, but I'm being recorded, so I'll watch my language. I don't want this. Yeah, you gotta edit it out afterwards. Just every second word, like a Drake song. So, you know, most of the time I'll say to them, bold. Because if you are an entrepreneur and you really want to be an entrepreneur, you always have an ask. Always. And the confusion that people have is they go, oh, well, but I don't have an ask because I'm not asking for money. Well, that's fine. Your ask doesn't always have to be money. There's other things you can ask for too. Can you imagine what some of the other things you might ask for?
Mentorship.
Aha.
Connections.
Devices.
Yeah. Yeah. There's all sorts of things you can ask for. But it doesn't have to just be for money. Remember what I said at the beginning? Investment is not just money. It's time and belief in you. Sometimes that time and knowledge and access to connections and knowledge, I can tell you right now, is worth far more sometimes than money. I do have an investor, his name's Clay, in BrickClick. He's invested only $10,000. It's not very much. But the amount of knowledge and advice and connections that he's given me, it's made BrickClick completely different. So, but it's his, and why did he invest in BrickClick? Well, yeah, because he sees the reason for the solution. He's been in retail. He worked with Lululemon and Kit and Ace and Indochino. And so he's very connected to the solution because we're building actually something he tried to build at Indochino for 3 years and spent like $1 million on it. And he's like, you guys built it, this is crazy. But he's really hammered us down on how we can verbalize it, how we can sell it, and the connections we can make and all that stuff. So yeah, I got him in for 10K, but the knowledge and the connections, because he believes in us and he believes in me. So always have an ask, but be specific, as with anything, about your ask. So when you say mentors, what kind of mentor? When you say advice, what kind of advisor? Right? There's a lot of different kinds of advisors. Do you need a marketing? Well, in your case, probably not. But you might need a technical advisor, for example. And you might need a financial advisor. You might need a business advisor, right? What kind of advisor? Because I do hear that all too often as well, is I'll hear people come out and they go, yeah, I'm looking for mentors and advisors and connections. That's a big one. So recently, for example, there was a conference here called the Sustainable Brands Conference. And I got to mentor for 5 of the 11 companies that were pitching. It was an amazing experience. But sustainable brands, so you can well imagine what some of the companies were, right? Very much around the sustainability space. Clean tech, for example, a lot of stuff like that. So there's this one company, I actually don't remember what it was called, but what they were doing was something around that they had a platform for companies or brands, particularly fashion brands, that wanted to market by showing off their sustainability side and creating marketing assets that would go out talking about more of the sustainability side. So attracting customers because you're making the earth more green or more sustainable or things along those lines. And they already had some customers and it was going really well. So then I says to them, well, so what's your ask? And at the end he's like, yeah, I'm looking for fashion brands that are looking for opportunities to market in the sustainability space. Okay, now if I'm in the audience, I have no idea who to connect this person with. So I said to him, can you tell me an example of who your dream customer would be? You're at a conference where the CEO or the president of Canadian operations of Starbucks and the ex-VP of Lululemon and some of the most amazing brands in Canada are going to be there. There's 1,800 audience members. You never know who knows who. Customer. While you're in Canada, who's your dream customer? Oh, well, you know, I would love to get into Lululemon. I'd love to connect with Nike Canada. I'd love to. So ask for that. Don't be afraid to ask for what you're looking for because you never know who knows who. And unless you ask, nobody's ever going to know how to help.
And that stage that you start the idea or the first act for a pitch, sometimes I have no idea or some specific idea what kind of customer, like a mag.com or something like that.
Yep.
And then how to be more specific for this kind of, for example, our last pitch, Maria and me was pitching about we were pitching about the share room, hotel rooms.
Okay, yeah.
You ask for a hotel contact, have no one. How to be more specific.
Oh, that's the one Bruno emailed me. Yeah, I didn't have any connections.
Yeah, it's so difficult to get this connection, but is it correct to ask like a hotel connections or?
Yeah, or connections in hospitality.
Yeah, but in that case, we try to be specific for a hotel because you're gonna work with the hotels.
Yep.
It's okay, right?
Yep, absolutely. Here we go. Oh, I don't think I want the doc though, I want PDF. Where's the PDF? Okay, cool. So, I gotta be aware of my time here. It's first time I'm doing this, so I just gotta. Cool. Okay, so if you guys want to pull out the workbooks, if you don't already have them out, I think you already do. So I'm gonna well imagine, I'm glad Bruno left the room because I don't want to make him mad. But my guess is most of you probably went through the Lean Business Model Canvas process. Okay, so I'm gonna go kind of against the rules because I actually don't like the Lean Business Model Canvas. In my personal opinion, I feel like it gets introduced too early sometimes, and it's just a sort of excuse to say, here, go and fill this out, and off you get. Now, it's useful in its own right, absolutely, but I actually think there's a crucial step that should come before that. So I'm not actually asking you guys to revert and go backwards, but something that I find that helps a lot of companies that I work with is just to go through the basic who, what, where, why, when, how. The very basic questions. But guess what you get out of that? Can any of you guess what you would get out of that? They're simple questions, so you get simple answers, right? Because sometimes People overthink things. And here's the reality, is you guys are looking at building your own businesses. But guess what? You know too much. You know so much about the business as you're growing it. It's just like a child. You get to know all its little intricacies, bits about its personality, how the market is, how big the market is, who your customers potentially are, all these things. But the reality is that a lot of entrepreneurs that I work with end up overthinking it because they know too much. Every single thing they know is important. But that's not the case, especially when you're pitching and presenting. Again, what you want to get to is filling the boxes, or ticking the boxes, or filling the buckets, right? So what's the key important pieces of information? Well, if it's about you, who? Who is the company? Who's your target customer? What do you do? Think of it conversationally. If you're in a room and you're networking, think about the beginnings of our pitch events. There's a reason we do the networking portion. It's not just because there's a bunch of people there. The purpose is actually because I want people to talk to each other. I want you guys to have an opportunity to say, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's why I'm here, right? It's with a value. So who are you? Who are your customer? What do you do? What are you going to do for your customer or your user or whatever? Where do you do it? So a lot of people, this is a funny one, the where is a really interesting question. Because I work with a lot of clients, and I should have said that before. So with Volition, you know me from the events. Volition Advisors, as it were, the actual main company, we work with entrepreneurs on a regular basis. So we do client sessions, helping them with their pitch, presentation, investor prep, business strategy, growth strategy, all that kind of stuff, right? So I actually just met with a client on Friday. His name's Artem, and he has a company he's building called Instructor. And I says to him, we went through this exercise, because the first time I met with him for coffee, I'm like, so tell me about the business, pitch me. And it's just this long, I have no idea what's going on. He's telling me one thing over here, then it goes over here. He's telling me he's gonna get every retail store at every mall in Vancouver, and I'm like, how are you gonna do that? How are you gonna get Nike? And he's talking about Nike and Adidas and Lululemon, and I'm like, but you can't just go to the mall and sign them up. They're part of large chains. Their decision makers are in completely different places. And how are you gonna get that inventory? And how are you gonna do, and I'm just like, I'm boggled by the end of it. I have no idea what's going on. He's just taking me on this journey, but to nowhere. And so the first session we did with him on Friday, I went through this exercise. I said, so who are you and who's your customer? And right away, it identified some clear and concise issues in his business. And then I said, okay, so where are you doing this? Oh, well, my solution's applicable to the whole world. Holy cow. And you're one man? Good luck. And I said, so are you Elon Musk? Do you have $100 billion in your account? He's like, well, no. I said, do you have $100 million in your account? No. I said, I know these aren't questions that I would normally ask somebody, but the reality is you don't have all the time, capital, and bandwidth in the world. You have to sleep at some point, I assume. And you have a life and you have things to do. So you can't spend every waking hour trying to build this up and going to every store in the world. How are you going to do that? Different cultures have different sales cycles, different communication tactics, different marketing methods. Right? So there's just not possible. So I said, okay, hold on. I get that you might want to take over the world someday. Great. Lots of people aspire to that. But I said, what's realistic? Who can we go after now that's your target customer? And where are they? Well, then he says, well, they're at all the malls. And I said, oh, okay, hold on. You're going to spend a whole bunch of time walking in malls trying to sign up these customers that are going to go, I'm just a manager here, I have no idea what's going on. I don't really care about my software solutions. I get them from head office. Cool, that's 2 hours of my time wasted. So, so the reality is, you really you don't want to overthink these things. So where? Okay, so we simplified. We said, okay, well, what's your beachhead, as we would call it? Well, his beachhead is in Vancouver. It's at what kind of customers. So where are you going to find those customers? And what we actually eventually came to was that ultimately he needed to get to the decision makers of localized retailers who are incurring growth. So for example, a great example here is a company called Fluvogue Shoes. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of them, but they're an amazing shoe company based out of Gastown. They're just about to open their 25th store in North America, and they just opened their first store in Amsterdam.
Which brand is this?
Fluvogue Shoes. So they're handmade, mostly leather shoes, but they're like really high quality. If you feel like spending $600 on a pair of shoes, it's a great place to go. Yeah, but they are an amazing company, and I know them because they're a Brickbit customer, right? So I said to him, you know, I think what would be much easier is if you started approaching localized retailers who are experiencing growth. Because essentially what we got down to was that he's digitizing flyers in real time. So you know how we all get flyers in our newspapers from companies that are selling their stuff, promos, as it were, right? So what he's doing is he has the ability to do that in real time. So if I've got 10 pairs of shoes on the shelf that I want to get rid of and I want to promo out and get them out of my inventory, but I want to promo them, he can do that in real time as a flyer put online. So imagine like Instagram, where you're seeing pictures and information of product that's of interest to you, and you can easily either swipe it into a cart or say no. And then you can do a bunch of different items from different stores in a mall type of experience, but I can put it all in my cart and check out once. And it all gets shipped to you the next day. It's actually a pretty amazing solution. But we had to go through this process before we could actually distill down to that simplicity. Otherwise, what was he going to do? He was going after every retailer and every mall all around the world. Ugh, I can imagine. I'd give up today. I'd be like, okay, I'm done. I don't have that kind of energy anymore, I'm sorry. So, you know, and then some other simple parts of it are, scrolling down, whoops. A big one, as I talked about, the reason I left this, saying this to the end, a big one that comes up, what do we talk about? About you being the star of the show. So what do you think is important to people that you're presenting to? Especially in today's day and age. Why are you doing it? Why do you care? Why does it matter? Especially in clean tech. It's such an important question. Why? Why does this matter? Why is this going to change their world? Why is it better than what already exists? And especially in clean tech, why is this going to leave the world in a better way than it was before? Right? So particularly for investors who are looking at clean tech solutions, that's probably one of the biggest questions they're going to ask. Right? So, Mark, for your, I'm assuming you're still on the cycling shop venture, or adventure, as it were. But, you know, a big question is also going to be why. So why you? Why that? And that's especially where I want to see in your pitch. And I already do see it. Like, you express very much about the passion you have in cycling and biking and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, that's so important for me to connect and engage with you. And especially for people who you want to connect with that want to help you with your business. They probably should be passionate about that kind of stuff too, right? So why is so important? Why do you want to do this? Yeah, I've heard ones before where they're like, well, and I don't mean any offense by this, but I've heard some before where it's like, yeah, it's because I want to get out of Brazil. But it's got to be more than that. There's got to be a reason deep down that you really want to pursue this and do this, right?
To believe that. To believe in that.
Yes, yeah. And here's why, actually, that's a good point. Here's why. If I'm an investor and you can't answer the reason why, it gives me a sense. Now here's from the investor side, again, taking the boxes. If I can't get that out of you and get a clear, concise answer, then I, as the investor, then question your want to stay with this on the long term, your persistence, your rigor, your want to stay doing it. Because a lot of people, when they don't have that kind of passion, guess what happens? 6 months down the line, they're like, screw it. I'm going to do something else now. And guess what investors don't like? They don't like investing in things that don't go places. Now, it is a reality. 8 out of 10 startups do fail. Okay. Yep. The statistic is, you'll see sometimes it says 9 or 1 out of 10 startups are a success, or however you want to read it. But there are some statistics that are starting to come out that in some jurisdictions, it's now 2 out of 10 or 1 out of 5 companies will be successful or see a result that is considered successful. But it just depends on where you are or where you're looking at the stat. So, and the reason they're saying that it's starting to change is because there's so much more support out there. There's more capital, there's more access to information, so companies are able to persist a bit better and a bit longer and get the support they need. So a big one is when. So a lot of people say, well, what do you mean when? So the question is very simple. Again, don't overthink it. When is this going to happen? What is your timeline? So if you're building an app, when are you going to have the beta done? When are you going to launch to customers, or users, I should say? When are you going to start monetizing? When are you going to see some sort of traction? When are you going to release live to iOS and Android? When are you going to get started? When are you thinking you're going to get your first customer? You know, these are really important things. When are you going to do things? When are you going to start growing your team? When are you going to be raising capital? Right? Timeline is very important because, especially as an investor, now it gives me an idea that you've, again, done your homework. And I'm going to say for a really quick second that it doesn't have to be 100% correct. You're very early stage. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you've thought about it. At least you have a plan. Let's be real. And investors know this. Anybody in the startup world knows this. Plans change. And in startup world, very quickly. We have to be agile. We have to change. We have to, take in the things we get and iterate very quickly, or else we're going to die or fail. But guess what? At least we have a plan. At least we have something to go by. Sure, my timeline might be this, but you know what? If it's off by a couple months, nobody's going to do anything. An investor's not going to be like, okay, give me my money back. Most of them, if they're the right investor, they're going to say, how can I help? What can we be doing to speed this up? And I'm having this in Berkeley right now. I thought we'd be further along. I'm not perfect, I'm human. The team is human. There's been some glitches along the way. Some stuff that's come up during onboarding and customer success that we found that, I was bringing on Flu Walk shoes, for example. It was like, oh, whoops, this happened, or things that we didn't account for. The first store onboarding is in Amsterdam. Things we didn't consider, like tax. We didn't know that taxes there were included and not calculated on top, so now we had to change that in the system. There was a bunch of different stuff that comes up, right? Training their staff has been a bit harder than we thought because of the time zone change. So there's a lot of variances, but at least we have a plan and a timeline, and that may shift, and that's okay. But what's important is communication to all of your key stakeholders along the way. And that's why we're here. So last but not least, and then of course how is that going to happen? So how are you delivering your product or service? In your case, it's a store or a location. In your case, it might be a software platform, or it might be a physical product. In your case, it might be a software or an app. I'm not saying that specifically, but like, it can be really anything. How is it going to be delivered? And then how are you actually going to do that? So this can touch on things like even the marketing. So I'm going to start it this way. I'm going to do a Thinkific course. I'm going to get customers to come in on my social media, right? And just, again, we have a plan. That it can change, but at least you've thought about it. And as an investor, what the hell impresses me the most? When entrepreneurs have shown that they've thought about all these different aspects. And even better, when they can communicate things with me. And I don't necessarily have to ask, but when I do ask, they have an answer that seems well thought out, clear, and concise. Who am I to argue most of these things? If you tell me, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, this is the timeline I have, this is how I'm going to do it, this is where I'm going to do it, okay, I can't really argue that. I might have suggestions, I might have advice, but it gives me even more buy-in. So there you go. So to teach all of this, over the years, getting to the next part, over the years, I've designed a technique called Pasoyas. I know it's got a funny name. It's not Dutch or anything like that. But Pasoyas has been created essentially from my own experience and in working with entrepreneurs in building their pitch and presentation. And let me give you a bit of background on that. One of the things that I've discovered over the years is that pitching is very much storytelling, and it's actually really funny. So I think for those of you who knew our recent pitch nights, we recently announced that we're launching in Amsterdam in September, right? So it was really funny when we went to Amsterdam, well, not went there, but when Melanie started speaking with Amsterdam, particularly with Startup Amsterdam and Hub Space, which I think is the company that's supporting us, and Women in Tech Regatta, who we're partnering with. The funny thing we found out, it's always interesting, the cultural differences when you go to different places. We found out there that they don't like the word pitching. What? Totally boggled my mind. I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, no, we call it storytelling. And I was like, so let me get this straight. So you put together some information in a structured flow that you tell someone else, and at the end, you ask for something. They're like, yeah. I said, so that's not pitch. That's tell. But for the sake of Amsterdam, we'll call it storytelling. Fine. I said, no problem. We'll come in, we'll do a storytelling workshop, and we'll do a storytelling night.
Maybe the problem is the B and B. Maybe Amsterdam, like beach night or a beach night would be like.
I don't know. A bitch night, yeah. Ooh, yeah. Especially when it's women focused over here. Because to be clear, we're launching there with women's pitch nights. There's a real lack of support for women focused or women-led entrepreneurship and startups in Amsterdam. They're about 5 years behind us. So and this is the stuff we're finding out. They're like, yeah, we don't call it pitching here, we call it storytelling. We're like, oh, okay. So I said, okay, that's fine. Because what we teach is storytelling. We did before. We just want to use the word pitch. So one of the things that I've discovered over the years that if you are building a story, or even if you're writing a story, or you're telling a story, whenever you read a book, any storybook you read, a piece of fiction, there is normally a psychology to how it's written. There's a beginning where you introduce the characters, there's some sort of problem, there's a climax, there's a solution, and there's an end, right? Very similarly, a pitch is in the same function. So what I've discovered over the years is that there is a psychology to pitching and presenting. So one of the things I love doing is starting off, so how this is developed is to start off with a story leading into the problem. Now the reason that there's a circle drawn all the way around with an arrow is because as you get more experienced, or some people are just really good at it, just naturally very good at pitching. But one of the things you're able to do over time is to start crafting the entire pitch into a story. But when you're a little less experienced or it's not something that's natural to you, a great way of doing it is to start off with a story that moves into the problem. I'll give you a great example. So a couple of years ago, there's a local angel investment forum that I go to called Karitsu. It's actually a worldwide angel investment forum, but it's here on once a month. This company comes in, they're called Blaze Bioscience. Now by the name Blaze Bioscience, it's not exactly something that you would just guess what they do. So I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. Maybe they set you on fire to get rid of your cancer or something, I don't know. So she comes in, and humble looking, kind of doctor-looking type woman. And she comes in and goes, she walks in, she sets up her presentation. And she starts and she goes, 2 years ago, my father died from a brain tumor. Pause, right? Think about the psychology of that. Okay, you're hooking me, you're getting me into the story. Okay, you've got me engaged. Okay, cool. So 2 years ago, my father died from a brain tumor. But he didn't die from the tumor. He passed away because of the 3 following invasive surgeries because they didn't get it all the first time. So she said, myself, as an almost 20-year entrepreneur, I felt like this affected me really deeply, and I felt like there had to be a better way. So I looked into it, and I discovered that it cost the US medical system almost $19 billion a year in these post-invasive surgeries and the deaths thereafter. The deaths are from infections, lack of oxygen, anything that can happen in surgery. You're talking about head surgery, brain surgery. They're opening up the skull and working on it. So many things can happen. So she said, there has to be a better way. Skipping all the rest of the stuff, she goes, so what we've created. So I've told you the problem. Now I want to hear the solution. So what we've created is a novel way of using a specific type of scorpion venom that when injected into the affected area highlights 99.89% of the affected tumor area for the doctor who will remove most of it the first time. So there's a largely decreased percentage of return visits and invasive surgeries. And it'll save the medical system $18.6 billion once we pass clinical trials. We're at phase 2. Health tech is a bit different. There's a whole process to it. But can you imagine? But she told us the story. She hooked us in, right? There's a story to it, but then she kept the story going. So here's the thing that happened. There's a problem. Here's the solution. Here's the opportunity. And then she gets into, she's already said, I'm a 20-year entrepreneur. Then she comes back and says, well, I have a doctorate in, I can't remember exactly what it was, but she had 2 PhDs, and her advisory board was full of PhDs, and she had a business advisor and a fully fledged team of everything you could imagine. And she's like, and I'm raising, I think it was 1.2 million, and I've got 800K raised already, which we're getting 200K from this foundation, and I'm just looking to fill out the rest so that we can hit to the phase 3 of clinical trials. Okay, that's a pretty good flow and story arc. And then I think, well, no, it was to go to clinical trials. So there's with health tech, there's certain parameters to that of okay, you have to apply for this and that's what the costs are. So it's a pretty amazing story. But then if you actually hear it, it's a problem. So if I tell you, here's a problem, Waymar, what do you want to hear next? The solution. But then when I tell you the problem and solution, think about your audience. So what does the audience want to hear next? What's the opportunity out of that then?
Why are we here?
What's that?
Why are we here?
That's exactly right. Right? So there's an O and a Y. The O is the opportunity, and the Y is you. Why you? And the U is inclusive of the team, if there is one. Because it's such a large part of the opportunity. Again, when you're talking to investors, they're looking at investing in you, not necessarily the business. Because remember, when I'm looking at a business, I'm thinking, okay, this is probably going to pivot. I'm assuming you guys learned what pivot is at this point, right? So a reality is the common statistic these days is that a company is going to, or a business is going to pivot 5 to 7 times before they actually figure it out. And pivots can be small, large, doesn't really matter. Predominantly speaking, pivots can be a good thing. It usually means you're pivoting or moving towards product market fit. You're defining who the perfect customer is, what the perfect offering is to those customers. Who's going to pay for what? or who's going to sign up and use it the most, right? So pivots can be a good thing if done properly. So as an investor, a lot of times, again, I'm looking for the person that's going to go like this, even though it's like this, right? And then again, ending with your ask. So I want to talk about the opportunity for a second. Skip that part. Yep, there we go. So I think this is at the back of the package.
Can I get a break?
Oh, yes. So the back of the package, there's a thing, I'm skipping a bunch because we'll get to that. But speaking of the opportunity, is there a whiteboard in here? Oh, I guess it's behind the screen. That's okay. So at the back of the package, there's a portion that's called DDT. So I didn't create DDT, this is borrowed. And I actually got it from a good friend of mine named Jay Ash, who is the CEO and founder of Picketing, which is a great local company. That's who we use for our registration for our events. So you guys would have come across them before. So DDTE, every company, every successful company in the world has DDTE, which means that it's distinctive, disruptive with a product or service, with a team that can execute. Because without any one of those things, you cannot be successful. I'm sorry, it just isn't realistic. Somehow, you have to be distinct over everything else that exists. You have to be different than the status quo. You have to disrupt the current way of doing things. Somehow. You know, even as it's as simple as what they say is building a better mousetrap. Sometimes it is just that. Sometimes there's a mousetrap and it just needs to be a better way of doing things. It could be as super as disruptive as some of the things that exist in the world, that like Blaze Bioscience. Can you imagine solving brain tumors with scorpion venom? Who would have thought? Another local company, a great example in Richmond. They are solving prostate cancer using leech saliva. It's incredible. And you would never know. I met these guys, they're called Biopal. And no, they're not. Yeah, a question I get all the time is, are they putting the leeches right on it? No. What they're doing is they're taking these particular types of leeches, they're growing them in a farm sustainably, and then they're taking the saliva out and then injecting it into the affected area. And the reason it works, or what they're discovering, is that prostate cancer is a type of cancer that kills other cells by not allowing blood flow. So what they discovered is there's this doctor in Thailand that's been doing it for years, and they were like, "But how?" And what they discovered is that there's a certain chemical in the saliva that makes the blood not clot, because it's the clotting from the cancer that causes more cancer. So if you can get blood flow, what happens? The blood flow allows more nutrients, oxygen, things to get to the area to heal. It's pretty novel. But imagine how disruptive that is to the prostate cancer industry, right? There's some incredible stuff out there. And again, you're not going to go anywhere if you don't have a team that can execute and a plan thereof. It's one thing to have a team, but if they don't know what they're doing, you're just going to spin your wheels. Great example is there a company I worked with. I'm on the advisory board now, but I started working with them about 2 years ago, called Virtual Fantasy League. They're now called Blimp. And back when I started with them, it's 4 founders, 4 guys. They've all known each other for years. They're all like, yeah, cool, it's all awesome, great. And then I take a look at their business. They're like, yeah, but we can't seem to get any traction. Nothing's really happening. We don't know what we're doing. What's wrong? So I come in, and the first thing I did was I interviewed each of them separately, and I said, so what is it you do here? So I said that to Gary, and then I had a meeting with Owen, and I'm like, so what is it you do here? And then I had a meeting with Dave, and then with the other fellow. And their answers were all like stepping on each other's toes. So it was like, you were basically doing a lot of what you were already doing, and then some of what you were doing was what they were doing, and some of what you were doing was what they were doing. And nobody was really talking to each other, they were just all doing and not getting anywhere. So the quick analogy that I made when I ended the session with them is I said, look, here's what I've discovered. You guys are like 4 wheels on a car. You're all spinning You sort of know where you're going, but you've got kind of a map to follow, but you're all just spinning your wheels and going different directions. So you're never going to get to your destination. They were like, yeah, you hit it, that's it. And so the big thing was coming in and doing the TE portion. So great, you've got this team, but what are you guys doing? What is it you're doing to execute and actually grow this business? So you can't have a successful business without those components. So something to bear in mind as you're building this out. And then last but not least, you've probably heard me talk about this before at the pitch events, but we talked about our ask and always having an ask. So there's a structure to that. Like we said, ask doesn't always have to be for money. And what the suggestion is that it should always be for M&M, not the rapper.
Please.
I don't know if I'm that hip to say that. It's M&M, which is mentors, network, money, in that exact order. And the reason is, if you're doing your job properly, one will lead you to the other. The right mentor will help you figure out the right network to tap into. Network can include things like advisors, partners, potential customers, users, so on and so forth, investors. And then money is when you're actually asking for money and you're actually ready to ask for money. Now, I'm just going to say this because it's something that comes up a lot, and I don't know if you guys would have learned this, just to make a clear distinction, because this came up when I was teaching at Langara as well. So, do you guys know what the difference is between a mentor and an advisor?
Not really.
No? Okay, good, great. So the difference between a mentor and an advisor, a mentor is somebody who cares about you and your success. An advisor is somebody who cares about you and the company's success. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I have a mentor, his name's Daryl. I meet with him once a month. We meet at Flying Pig in Gastown, it's my favorite restaurant. His too. We have a beer, we order appetizer to share, and we have an open table discussion where we will talk about anything. Anything that's affecting us positively or negatively. But what we make sure to do is to communicate our successes and not just our failures or fears. And here's why. In an entrepreneurship journey, it is difficult, it is hard, it can be lonely many times, more often than not, it can be lonely. In my world, I can tell you, I attest this because I don't talk to my family about it. My wife and I don't talk about business. I try to keep that out of home. She has enough issues to deal with 3 boys at home, trust me, and her ailing mother. So I try to keep it out of there. A lot of my friends, it's not really something that they're not entrepreneurs necessarily, so it's hard to talk to them about it because they don't really get it. And then same with my friends. And then the challenge ultimately for me, and I'm not trying to get a sob story here, but the challenge that I sometimes have is that I'm the teacher, I'm the advisor, I'm the consultant that most people come to. So it's hard for me to talk to other people about my problems or what I'm going through. Because most of the time they're like, well, but you should know what you're doing.
Do you have problems?
What? But you know how to raise, and you know how to do this. And it's like, no, but the reality is that I'm my own person, and I'm human, and I'm not perfect, usually. Sometimes I am. But, it can be lonely. So what we make sure to do, Daryl and I, is we make sure to celebrate our successes. So we like to open up the conversation with that. As soon as we get our beers, the first thing we do. What was the things that were successful for us in the last month? And it can be simple. So Daryl can say, well, I onboarded 30 new customers, which for him is a big month. For me, it can be like, oh, well, I just closed my round. Or it could be I hired this, or I did this, or this happened. Great. The last one actually was I got a teaching job. I was really excited about it. And I said, but I'm kind of nervous and I'm kind of anxious because I do one-on-one client sessions and I've done guest lectures, but I've never done an actual course. So I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit anxious about it. And so he was like, dude, you'll do fine. You know what you're talking about. You know what you're doing. You just need to structure it and make sure that you know what you're going to talk about for the 4 weeks, because otherwise you're going to kind of fall off. Right? So it's great. That's a mentor. So in our case, we co-mentor each other. On the other side of it, for BrickClick, for example, we have 4 advisors. So we have a business advisor, we have a legal advisor, we have a marketing advisor, and we have a retail advisor, because we're in retail tech. So we needed somebody who knows what we don't know, right? Deep into retail. And those advisors, I do a monthly coffee with each of them. I communicate with them on a regular basis through email and text, and then we have a quarterly meeting. That's my example. And what do? We sit down, we talk about the business. We don't talk about me and my problems or theirs. We talk about what is hindering the company. What do we need help with? Where do we need advice on the company as a whole? What kind of things do we need? Do we need more access to customers? Do we need access to capital? Do we need access to more team members? Are we struggling to find the right person? Right? So that's the big difference. So be very, again, specificity when you're asking for a mentor. Be clear that you actually are asking for a mentor and not an advisor, because I've seen that before. Sorry, you were going to ask a question.
An advisor is part of the company, or it's completely, it's like a consultant, and you have to pay him, or how does that work?
Great question. So this might be, it's not really a communications thing, but I'm happy to answer it regardless. So there are different types. So again, I'm from Volition Advisors. So in our case, Volition Advisors is a paid advisory service, so ostensibly we're consultants. But the difference is that most advisors, as it were, are offered an equity position in the company. So a standard advisory agreement is 1% over 4 years with what's called a one-year cliff, meaning that they earn 1% over the total of the 4 years, but the amount that they would have earned in the first year is held back until the end of the first year. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and then, okay, so if you got 4 years of equity to earn, right? So let's split that up by 0.25, 0.25, 0.25, 0.25. So the 0.25 they would have earned in the first year is not given to them until the end of the first year. That's a one-year cliff. And then they do what's called reverse vesting over the next 4 years. And the great thing about a standard advisory agreement is that it can be canceled at any time, because advisors can wear out their use, unfortunately, right? You might have a specific need in the first 1 or 2 years, but then you kind of get past that. So what you can do is you can end the relationship as an advisor. They'll have earned what they earned, which could be 0.75 of the 1%. And that's fine. There are variances. So for BrickClick, we use an accelerated advisory agreement, and ours is 1% over 2 years. But that's just because we wanted to attract the best advisors and have them really want to be part of it, rather than just a standard like, So so the variance is that standard is you would offer them an equity position, depending on their value. So if there's somebody, I have seen variances where you might have an advisor coming on board that is just like going to change the entire business's world, and they're going to put in a lot of time. But the big thing with that is you need to make sure that that's in writing as to what kind of time and expectations there are, especially if they're going to do more than what the 1% will be. So if they're coming in, they're saying, I want 5%. You need to be very clear about exactly what they're going to do for that 5%. There needs to be expectations, goals, everything set. Needs to, or else you're going to have some problems later. So generally the standard is the 1% over 4 years, and that's a standard advisor. But with Volition, what we do, the difference on how we work, our differentiator, as it were, is we don't take equity. So we're paid advisors. So instead of taking equity, you just pay us. Because one of the things I've discovered over the years with my couple of exits and growing startups and building companies is how valuable equity really can be in the end scheme of things. And sometimes you don't want to just give it away. It's good for the right strategic person, but sometimes when you just need some advice for a few weeks, maybe it's just easier to give you $600 and I'll do 3 sessions with you. And I'm not taking any equity. I'm in, I'm out, I'm good. Right? So that's the difference. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. Did any of you guys need to take a quick washroom break or anything? Okay. Let's do that really, really quick. That was close. I almost had to pull out the whip on that one. Anyways, so cool. Thanks for your attention so far, guys. So really quickly, I just wanted to ask you, there's another little variance on the schedule that I was hoping to get your guys' okay with, as Bruno alluded to at the very beginning. So as you can see in the schedule, I can repost this on Slack tonight. Everybody on here is on the Slack, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll post this along with my slides. So maybe don't try to peek ahead too much, but just so you can review what we did today. And I'll post a PDF version of the Soyuz package. And I'll post is there something else you need me to post? Was that it? The slides, Soyuz package, and the schedule? Just to reconfirm. Okay, so the one variance was, I know that you guys usually don't do Fridays, but just because as I said, we were trying to work it around the pitch nights. And as you're aware, there's the pitch night tomorrow night, and then there's one on the 19th, which is on the Thursday, which is when I would have normally held class. But there's pitch night, which I'm hoping most of you, or if all of you, can come out to. So I was hoping that we could do the fourth class for the second week on Friday. Is that okay with everyone?
No. Usually I work whole day on Fridays. I try to figure out, but it's a little bit complicated to get someone to cover my shift
Okay.
for Friday.
So I don't know, I can either send you the materials and I can just do it separately. I'll just double check, what are we doing that day? Oops.
It's not impossible, but it's really difficult.
Oh, okay, so that day I kept, on purpose though, I kept it kind of light. So there's no it's all activities that day. So we're just practicing active listening, and which I'll have taught this session before. Or the class before that, I will have taught it. So you'll know what it is. It's just practicing it the next day, and then revisiting and reviewing our pitch and presentation that we've been learning along the way, that I just went through. So I can do that with you separately. It's not a problem. Is it okay for everybody else?
Yep.
Yep. It's good? Okay, awesome. Cool. Thank you, guys.
break up 2 hours.
Yeah, so I gotta go to the washroom. Doug, you've been gone for 2 hours. Where'd you go? I've been having a hard time. Okay, so we're gonna end off. Thank you for that, you guys. So we're gonna end off today's class with talking about identifying key stakeholders. So whether or not it's to Bruno's want or not, I'm not sure. But I did go through the business communications book that I think all of you guys have. And I'm going to say right now, it's a great book, sure, but, yeah, exactly. So if you guys have read it or if you've gone through it at all, it's very legacy. So there's a lot of kind of older school stuff in it. And a lot of it is great if you're an established business. That's what I would kind of say. If you have like all the teams at your disposal, you have people to do things for you or with you, and you can delegate tasks and you can do all the things on kind of a more scheduled and basis. But in startup land, a lot of it is very agile. Just like today, we have to sort of like modify and change things based on startup life, right? So I did follow some of it, but what I really liked about the ability to teach this course particularly, and I think this is where Bruno and I really connected, is the fact of the matter is that sure, a lot of this, you could read a book and you can kind of get by, but there's a lot of things over the last, call it 17 years, that I've discovered as an entrepreneur and startup that are very specific in communications that may not be in the book, or may be kind of different than what the book says. So I felt like this was a great opportunity to teach the course in that vein. So in the book, there is a section that talks about stakeholders, and there's a lot of information you can find online about identifying key stakeholders, but most graphics that I found had like 12 to 13 different lines. And I was just like, holy cow. But if you really looked at it, a lot of times there's a lot more established businesses where you'd have internal teams, and you'd have like certain managers, and you'd have people who are in charge of departments, and you'd have all these departmental stakeholders and all that kind of stuff. So that's not usually a reality for early stage startups. So normally, how I built this was more based on early stage startup mode. Let's identify the early ones that you're really going to have to be concerned about in the early days. Okay? So those include your employees. So obviously, as you're growing the company, of course you're going to want to be able to communicate with them. So how do you communicate with those employees? So we will talk, I think it's in the next class, about communication methods. So things like Slack, about email. Now, yeah, we use those on a daily basis, but I'll tell you what, most of us use them wrong. So I'm going to give you kind of some guidelines of things on how you can do that maybe better when you're in a more professional way as a startup, of how you use those tools and the etiquette around those. Customers and users, how do you properly communicate with them? There's one thing to just send out emails, but how do you actually nurture them? What's a drip campaign? What do you tell them, and how do you tell them that information? And when should you do that, right? In startup land, there's a big difference between co-founders, non-investor shareholders, and your business partners. Okay, so business partner is fairly obvious. Somebody just you're partnered in business with. A co-founder is literally somebody who is at your equivalent, that has an equivalent stake in the business or close to it, or equivalent role. And then you have non-investor shareholders, so people who have earned some kind of equity by some way. So they might be an advisor, they might be a consultant that you exchange some sort of equity with in exchange for services, somebody who you did an exchange of equity for services for. Could be an organization. So how do you communicate with those? And then again, with your advisors and mentors, how do you communicate with them separately? As I said with BrickClick, for example, we do quarterly meetings, but then I also do, in my case, I do a monthly coffee with each of them individually. Sometimes, depending on the subject matter, I might pull them 2 out of the 4 into a meeting, because other ones don't have to be involved. Mike doesn't have to be in every meeting that Keith's in, for example. Same with mentors. Like I said, I do a monthly mentor meeting with my mentor, right? But this is based on you again, but you should probably plan some of this out, right? So again, we need to have a plan of attack. How are we actually going to do this and achieve results, and not just go willy-nilly? Because that's unfortunately what I see a lot from a lot of entrepreneurs. Is I'm gonna wing it, hope for the best, maybe it'll go well, but let's actually plan something out and have a plan for it. Because the best results are achieved by setting expectations and meeting or exceeding those expectations. And that's true of any kind of stakeholders of your business. Because the more you show to them that you're taking this seriously and achieving results, the more actively they're going to want to be involved and engaged. And the more help you're going to get. Again, it takes a village. And then last but not least, this one, why I put it at the bottom, investors, obviously another key one, and how we communicate with investors, what that looks like, investor updates, so on and so forth. Then the last one is on the bottom on purpose. And the reason I put it on the bottom is because it's sort of an optional. So what I mean by government and support organizations would be things like accelerators, incubators, things like that. We don't really have any true ones here in Vancouver anymore because Wavefront closed. But if you were in Toronto, for example, they have Mars, which is an amazing accelerator based out of Toronto. But you have to have a regular communication basis with them, even post-graduation or when you're an alumni of their program. They want to maintain contact with you. They want to know updates. Can be very similar to investor updates, but they want to know what's going on. And then government, why that's sort of optional is not every company has a connection or engagement with government, but some do. So like in clean tech space, you'll have access and capability to get all sorts of government grants, government funding, government programs, and support for that. And however, you're going to have some sort of regular reports to them, for example, and how to communicate updates with them and progress and so on and so forth. And it's going to be very stringent. And so you need to make it part of your plan along with your plan for communicating with everybody else. Now, a lot of it overlaps. I don't want you to look at this and go, oh my, how am I going to keep all of this up? The reality is like I said, if we create a plan, I'm telling you right now, once we document it, a lot of it will have overlap. If you imagine, I assume, do you guys all know what a Venn diagram is?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have the overlapping circles. A lot of it will end up overlapping. So you'll be able to reconstitute some of the content from one into the other. It's just make sure you have a plan, almost like one of those timelines you see on a spreadsheet where you can see the bars and you see, oh, okay, so I'm going to do this one this time. Oh, this one happens to overlap with that, so I know I can take part of that and do it in here, right? It's just so much easier, especially as you grow and you have other people to hold accountable and delegate to, because now they know what that schedule is, and it'll help you as you build into your marketing schedule, which you would know this, is you want to build your marketing schedule, for example, on your communications. How are you going to market to people and when? Right? Building a communications schedule. So this can lead into the bigger component of the other. So the homework you guys have, very, very simple. What I want you guys to do is take this, and I want you guys to each fill it out as to who you feel your key stakeholders will be in your business, and if possible, name them. And then I want you to identify 1 to 2 methods of how you feel you would best communicate with them and how often. Does that make sense?
Examples.
So examples would be like I said, so for me, for my advisors, I do monthly coffees with each of them. I do a quarterly meeting. With my investors, I do a every second month update by email, which we'll go over how we do that in a later class. That makes sense?
Yeah.
With customers, users, it might be, maybe it doesn't work with your business to communicate with them by social media, but maybe it does, right? Waymar, you're probably a perfect example for social media, right? I followed you on Instagram, it's great content. So that's probably a great way of communicating with your customers, but that may not be the case in everybody's case, right? It might not be the case in Andres' case. For a clean tech solution, I don't know, right? So how do you communicate with them, and what's the best methods, and how often? That's what I want to see out of this, if you can.
Well, are we filling this?
I'll get to that in a second. So that's the first part of the homework. The second part of the homework is I just want you guys to review that, familiarize yourselves with it. If you have any questions, of course, you can ask me on Slack or shoot me an email or ask me in the next class. But I just want you to familiarize yourself with it. If you want to skip ahead and start filling it out at your own pace, that's fine, but we will be filling it out as we go. And then you're going to be handing it in at the end. And we're going to be using it, we're going to be doing a presentation at the end, like I said, to myself and Katerina. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Cool. And then my hope is that who here is coming to Fish Night tomorrow night?
Everybody.
Everybody.
You're all coming out tonight? Or tomorrow night? Tonight.
What time is it?
Yeah. It starts at 5:30. Yeah.
Where is it?
Perfect. I'll be on time.
It's at a place called 78 Ventures in Gastown.
I'll be on time.
Yeah.
Favorite
68.
restaurant?
I'll be early.
What's that?
The favorite restaurant? Where is it?
What's your
Favorite
favorite
restaurant in Gastown?
Oh, Flying Pig.
Flying Pig.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's about a block away from there. Yeah, so of course you'll be joining us tomorrow night for the pitch night. So there is homework out of that, and it's going to be true of every pitch night. At the next class, we're gonna open up by talking about, now that, like, that's why I want you guys to review and familiarize yourselves with the Pasoyas package, because I wanna talk in the next class, we're gonna start with the next class by talking about what we saw at the pitch night. Learning and knowing what you know out of that package. Does that make sense?
Yep. What was missing and.
Yeah, like what
Yeah.
things did you notice? Like, yeah, 3 of the companies didn't have an ask, and let's talk about that, right? I'll engage with you on the questions and what we said, but I want to see, like, what did you guys see and not see, and what was your perspective, and what was missed, and what was good, what was bad, that kind of stuff, because that's only going to make you guys better, in my opinion. Okay, so that's going to be true of every pitch night, of both pitch nights, and then also of the guest speakers. What are the things you learned from the guest speakers?